It absolutely amazes me to know that kids in our Gen Z society today are actually preferring older games versus the modern AAA games or AAA quote unquote. I mean, I don't like how games are considered like AAA. To me, that feels kind of like an insult to my own love for video games as a whole. But honestly, though, it really makes me happy to know that kids today are wanting to play more classic games over the more modern ones. But there is a very solid explanation to it, and I've decided that for today, Big Brother Major League Gaming will tell you guys a very interesting story on how I feel about this whole thing. Now, grab some popcorn and get some soda because this video could be pretty long. Not too long, hopefully, but I'll try to keep it interesting for you guys. So let me take you guys back to my childhood years, starting with the 90s. I was born in 1990 with a mother and father who introduced me to playing a lot of Nintendo, and I also had an aunt who got me into playing some classic Sonic games. So there have been a few consoles that I grew up with. The I grew up with the NES, which my grandfather had. The Super NES that my I believe my mother actually got for the family, and I also grew up with the Game Boy, and I also grew up with the Game Gear. Let's see what else I grew up. These are the systems that I first grew up with, like when I was like 5 years old, and I remember at the time they were great systems to play. They had like the great games like Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Genesis, Super Mario World for the Super NES. I also vaguely remember playing Duck Hunt when I was like very little, like 2 or 3 years old, and at the time it was difficult to play because I didn't really know how to aim. So I was really like just missing a bunch of ducks in the game. But the game itself definitely had a huge impact on my childhood. So I can't really say much about it. But man, I have no regrets growing up with such systems with my life. And moving forward, those same systems pretty much helped me live my life. Just growing up along with Nintendo. The next Nintendo system that I grew up after all that was the Nintendo 64, and that was when Nintendo decided to go completely 3D with their systems, and it was just a magical experience at the time. Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64 were my first games to play. I remember when I went out to get a haircut with my dad. Yes, the Nintendo 64 was there for me to like get a glimpse of Super Mario 64, and I gotta say, man, that was just awesome. And the same thing happened to me with the Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. My dad and I got a haircut. I was like 7 years old when this was like a thing. They had a demo of Ocarina of Time, and that was definitely the game I was wanting to get next for Christmas. And soon enough, Christmas of 1998 came. Ocarina of Time was my game, and Ocarina of Time was the first 3D Zelda game to come out with a very powerful story that was developed by Nintendo itself, and it's still my favorite video game to play as of today. And there's just so much about it that I can talk about. But if you guys haven't played the game yet, you guys should play for yourselves because I think the game can tell you more about itself than I actually could in this video alone. Yeah. Then we have the Nintendo GameCube that came out in 2001. That was a Christmas present for me, my brother, and my sister. and we were actually uh, we were actually on America's Funniest Home Videos for that thing, and that happened in like 2002. I know I'm kind of rambling right now, but I think I think you guys understand what I'm going with. Man, I have to say that the Nintendo GameCube was one of the systems that helped me and my siblings get through some really tough times, as well as the Nintendo Wii. See, the thing is, we were all going through some really rough moments um, in the early 2000s. I was a high school teenager at the time, and my siblings were still very young, and the system, the Nintendo GameCube, I mean, was really there to help us get through it all. And I can't thank Nintendo enough for making such systems that can actually save our lives. Which is something that'll go more into in another video, but I just want to get that out there at the very least. The Nintendo Wii was the next system we got. That was rather revolutionary. Like literally, you could like swing your hand around like a remote control in your hand. You could like play tennis. I'm using my TV here as an example, my TV remote. You could do all sorts of stuff, and Nintendo was like really hitting it off at the time to like get the attention of like casual gamers. It was like a system, the Wii I mean, for even like very old like the elderly to play. Let's just say elderly because I want to try to use better terms here. No, I didn't put my belt on right, did I? That's okay. This is an old belt that I'm using, so I didn't put it on right. I just noticed that. And yeah, that's pretty much my whole story with the classic games. And even at my age right now, I would still prefer like classic games or even remakes of classic games over the more modern Nintendo games because those games have played a much a very strong role for me as a child. So anyway, moving on. I wrote a list of things that I want to talk about as to why children today are choosing classic games over AAA games. Now, the first bullet on my list here is that retro games show us the true history and the evolution of video games over time. Games that were made back in the 80s and 90s, especially, were an opportunity for children today, or well, are I meant to say, excuse me, to know and understand what games were like in the olden days, quote unquote. They get to see what the graphics were then, were back then were like, how they are played compared to games today, and they even get to see how much more story driven that old games were, unlike today's games. And this is very true because unfortunately, a lot of games today are they try to they try to like to emphasize on story a lot, but they kind of fail at it. Fortunately, though, for Nintendo, they still seem to get it right, except for Pokemon. Next thing on the list, classic games provide higher value over time. Needless to even say, games that have been around with us for generations appear to be more valuable, as well as being more important in our lives. And this is very true, even in my case, because Ocarina of Time, which is my number one favorite Zelda game, that game alone continues to help me get through my own hardships, even as of right now. And you got to understand, classic games for us, you know, for living in Gen Z now, they're gonna be important for many generations to come. And I'm gonna be one of those people who's gonna be willing to educate the today's children on what classic games are like. I want them to understand what we had to grow up with compared to what they have right now. Anyway, next thing on the list here. Whoops. classic games have nothing to do with politics. Now, this is somewhat arguable, at least from what I could tell. A lot of classic games that I grew up with had nothing to do with politics at the time. Although there were some games that were impacted by some real life situations. If you guys remember, there was a Superman game on the N64 that had the Twin Towers from New York City. That game was, well, they had to change it up after the 9/11 event. I don't know when that game came out, but that's one example of how some games can be impacted by real life matters. And more importantly, and I'll be straight up honest about this. Classic games and movies are never ever woke. You can say what you want about this, but I never had any issues with wokeness in classic games, and I want to keep it that way. As I've said before, if you go woke, you're gonna go broke. That's the story of it. Yeah, so there you have it, ladies and gents. That was pretty much my story of my take on classic games and why they're so important to me as of today. And I'm pretty sure my siblings who could be watching this video might agree with me as well. This is Major League Gaming, logging out. Thank you for watching.